The scream that tore from Olivia Bennett's throat died in the howling wind as the door slammed shut behind her, the heavy bolt sliding home with a finality that turned her blood to ice. She pounded on the weathered wood, with fists already going numb, her thin nightgown no match for the blizzard that had descended upon Pueblo, Colorado, with merciless fury. December 1885 had brought the worst winter in living memory, and her stepmother had just condemned her to freeze in it. "Please, Martha, please let me in." Olivia's voice cracked as snow whipped against her bare feet, the cold already seeping through her skin and into her bones. Through the frosted window, she could see Martha's silhouette turn away, unmoved by her desperate pleas. Her father's new wife had made no secret of her hatred these past 3 months since the wedding, but Olivia had never imagined it would come to this. The wind drove ice crystals into her face like tiny knives, and she stumbled backward from the door, her auburn hair already thick with snow. The Bennett farm sat 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, and in this storm, visibility extended no more than a few feet. Olivia knew she had two choices: freeze to death on her own doorstep or try to find help in the whiteout conditions. She chose to move. Each step through the knee-deep snow felt like walking through molasses, her muscles screaming in protest as the cold worked its way deeper. Her father was in Denver on business, wouldn't return for another week. Martha had timed this perfectly, waiting until they were alone, until the storm predictions had everyone battening down for days of brutal cold. Olivia had been asleep when her stepmother dragged her from bed and shoved her into the night. The woman's face twisted with something beyond hatred, something dark and satisfied. Olivia's tears froze on her cheeks as she pushed forward, aiming for where she thought the road might be. The Stockton ranch lay 3 miles east. If she could just find the road, follow it through the storm, maybe she could make it. But the world had become nothing but white chaos, the wind shrieking like a living thing, and she could no longer feel her feet. Time lost all meaning. She might have been walking for minutes or hours. Her nightgown clung to her body, soaked through and freezing stiff. Her thoughts began to scatter like the snow, and she found herself thinking of her mother, dead these 5 years from consumption. What would Mama think, knowing her daughter would die the same winter night, frozen instead of fevered? Olivia's legs gave out, and she pitched forward into a snowdrift. The cold felt almost warm now, and some distant part of her mind recognized this as a bad sign. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. The wind continued its banshee wail, and she thought she heard her mother's voice calling her home. She didn't remember crawling, didn't remember her hands finding wood, the corner of a building, steps leading up to shelter. Her last conscious thought was that she'd found something solid, something that blocked the wind, and then the darkness swallowed her whole. Carter Sinclair had learned to wake at first light during his years driving cattle from Texas to Montana. Even now, settled on his own 160 acres outside Pueblo, his internal clock roused him before dawn. He lay in his bunk for a moment, listening to the wind that had battered his cabin all night, then swung his legs out and reached for his boots. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers, and his breath misted in the cold air as he fed fresh wood into it. He was a practical man of 27 years, lean and strong from hard work, with dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that missed little. He'd bought this land 2 years ago with money saved from a decade of ranch work, and he'd built everything on it with his own hands. The cabin was small but solid, the barn well constructed, and he had 50 head of cattle that would make him a modest living if he could keep them through the winter. This storm, though, he'd seen bad weather, but this blizzard had come in with unusual ferocity. He pulled on his heavy coat and opened the door to check the damage, and that's when he saw her. At first, he thought it was just a snowdrift on his porch, but snowdrifts didn't have long, dark red hair frozen in icy tangles. His heart kicked hard against his ribs as he dropped to his knees beside the figure. A woman, barely more than a girl, curled on her side in nothing but a soaked nightgown. Her lips were blue, her skin the color of snow, and she wasn't moving. Christ! Carter scooped her into his arms, shocked by how light she was, how cold. He'd seen men die of exposure, knew the signs, and this girl had every one of them. He kicked the door shut behind him and carried her straight to his bed, the only place in the cabin that held any warmth. His hands worked quickly, stripping away the frozen nightgown with clinical efficiency. He'd tended injured cowboys enough times that modesty took a distant second to survival. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then added his own body heat, holding her against him as he rubbed her arms and legs, trying to restore circulation without causing more damage. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, with delicate features and skin that would probably be pale even when she wasn't half frozen. Dark lashes lay against her cheeks, and he could barely detect the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what in God's name had she been doing out in a blizzard in her nightclothes? Carter kept working, warming her slowly, carefully. He'd heard stories of people who'd been brought inside too quickly, warmed too fast, and died from the shock of it. He stoked the fire higher, heated water on the stove, and periodically touched warm cloths to her hands and feet, checking for frostbite. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through his window, she made a sound, a small whimper, followed by a violent shiver that shook her whole body. "That's it," Carter murmured, tucking the blankets tighter around her. "Come on back." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. They were the color of honey, he noticed, golden brown and currently clouded with pain and fear. "Where?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper, and she started shaking harder, her body finally able to respond to the cold it had endured. "You're safe," Carter said, keeping his tone calm and steady. "You're in my cabin. I'm Carter Sinclair. I found you on my porch." Those honey eyes tried to focus on his face, and he saw the moment memory crashed back into her. She gasped, tears spilling over, and tried to sit up. "Easy, easy." He held her shoulders gently, keeping her lying down. "You're not going anywhere in this condition." "Can you tell me your name?" "Olivia," she managed through chattering teeth. "Olivia Bennett. Please, I can't go back. Please don't make me go back." The desperation in her voice sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the weather. "Nobody's making you do anything. But I need to know what happened. How did you end up outside in this storm?" She was crying in earnest now, her body racked with sobs and shivers. Carter grabbed another blanket and pulled it around her, then carefully helped her sit up enough to take some warm water. She sipped it, wincing as it went down, and he could see her struggling to compose herself. "My stepmother," Olivia finally said, her voice steadier, though still weak. "She locked me out. My father's in Denver. She waited until we were alone until the storm came, and she pushed me out and locked the door." Carter's jaw tightened. He'd encountered his share of cruel people in his years, but this level of malice shocked even him. "The Bennett farm, that's 2 miles west of here. You know it? Passed by it a few times. Your father's the one who bought the Henderson place couple years back?" At her nod, he continued. "You walked 2 miles in that storm, in the dark. That you're alive is nothing short of a miracle." "I didn't even know where I was going," she whispered. "I just knew I had to move or die. I must have gotten turned around. I was trying to reach the Stockton ranch. You went the opposite direction. Probably saved your life. The Stockton place is farther, and you'd never have made it." He studied her carefully, noting the way she'd pulled the blanket tight around herself, the vulnerability in her eyes. "Your stepmother did this on purpose. Tried to kill you." It wasn't a question, but Olivia nodded anyway. "She's hated me since she married my father. I thought it was just that she resented me being there, taking his attention, but tonight the way she looked at me when she pushed me out, she shuddered. She wanted me dead." Carter stood and moved to the stove, ladling some of the venison stew he'd made the day before into a bowl. "You need to eat something, get your strength back." "I shouldn't be here," Olivia said suddenly. "This isn't proper. I'm in your bed and we're not." "You were dying. Carter interrupted, bringing the bowl to her. Propriety can go to hell when someone's life is at stake. Now eat. She took the bowl with trembling hands, and he had to help her hold it steady enough to get the spoon to her mouth. The first bite made her eyes close in relief, and she ate slowly, carefully, as if her body had forgotten what warmth tasted like. Carter watched her, his mind working through the problem she presented. The storm showed no signs of letting up. He couldn't take her back to her father's farm, not with that woman there waiting. Even when the weather cleared, what then? A woman of her age, unmarried, who'd spent days alone in a bachelor's cabin? Her reputation would be in tatters, regardless of the circumstances. How old are you? He asked. 19. Why? Just trying to figure out what happens next. Olivia finished the stew and handed him the bowl, her expression troubled. I've been thinking about that too. I can't go back there. Even if the storm ends tomorrow, even when my father comes home, I can't trust that she won't try again. And nobody would believe me. Martha's been playing the devoted wife. Everyone in town thinks she's wonderful. Your father would believe you. Would he? Her voice turned bitter. He married her 3 months after meeting her. He's been blind to everything except his own loneliness since Mama died. I've tried to tell him how she treats me when he's not around, the cruel things she says, and he just tells me I need to give her a chance. Carter could hear the pain beneath her words, the betrayal of a father who should have protected her. He poured himself coffee and sat in the chair by the bed, giving her space while they talked. My mother died when I was 12, he said quietly. My father remarried within the year. I understand something of what you're describing. Did your stepmother try to murder you? No, but she made it clear I wasn't welcome. I left home at 14, hired on with a cattle outfit, and never looked back. He took a drink of the bitter coffee. I'm not saying that's what you should do. A woman's got different challenges than a man in that regard. I know. Olivia's hands twisted in the blankets. I've thought about leaving before, but where would I go? I've got no money of my own, no skills except keeping house and helping with the farm. And even if I could find work, no respectable household would hire me without a reference. They sat in silence for a moment, the wind howling outside like it was trying to tear the world apart. Carter found himself studying her face, the determination he could see beneath the fear and exhaustion. She'd survived something that should have killed her, had the strength to keep moving when giving up would have been easier. That spoke to a core of steel beneath the delicate exterior. The storm's going to keep us locked in here for at least a few days, he said. That gives us time to figure something out. But right now, you need to rest. Let your body recover. Where will you sleep? I've got bedrolls. I'll be fine by the fire. He stood and moved toward his small stash of extra supplies. I'm going to step outside for a minute, check on the animals. You should try to sleep. He pulled on his heaviest gear and headed out into the maelstrom, needing the blast of cold air to clear his head. The barn was only 20 yards from the cabin, but he had to follow the rope he'd strung between buildings to keep from getting lost. The cattle were huddled together for warmth, and he checked their water and feed before heading back. When he returned to the cabin, Olivia had burrowed deep into the blankets, only the top of her auburn hair visible. He could hear her breathing, soft and even, already asleep. He built up the fire, made himself a bedroll on the floor, and tried not to think about how complicated his simple life had just become. The storm raged for 3 days. Carter had never seen anything like it, the snow piling up to his waist, the wind screaming with such force that the cabin walls creaked under the strain. But inside, in the small space warmed by the stove and insulated by heavy logs, an odd sort of peace settled over him and his unexpected guest. Olivia spent the first full day mostly sleeping, her body recovering from its near-death experience. Carter checked her hands and feet regularly for signs of frostbite and was relieved to see that while they were red and sore, she'd likely keep all her fingers and toes. It was another small miracle in a situation full of them. By the second day, she was well enough to sit up and stay awake for longer periods. Carter had rummaged through his belongings and found an old shirt and pair of pants that she could wear, though they hung on her small frame. She'd rolled up the sleeves and legs and tied the waist with a piece of rope, and somehow managed to look both ridiculous and oddly endearing. "I must look like a scarecrow," she said, catching him watching her. "You look warm. That's what matters." He handed her another bowl of stew. His supplies were adequate, but not luxurious, and he found himself wishing he had something better to offer her than the same venison stew for the third meal in a row. "It's good," she said, reading his expression. "Better than anything Martha made, I can tell you that. She was a terrible cook, but convinced my father she was wonderful at it by always making sure I did the actual cooking." "Your father didn't notice?" "My father notices very little these days." Olivia's voice was sad rather than angry. "He loved my mother so much. When she died, it was like part of him died too. He went through the motions of living, working the farm, taking care of me, but his heart wasn't in it. Then Martha came along, all smiles and sympathy, and he latched onto her like a drowning man grabbing a rope." Carter sat across from her with his own bowl. "How'd they meet?" "She was a widow, or so she said. Came through Pueblo on her way to California, supposedly, ran out of money, and took work at the hotel. My father went into town for supplies, stayed at the hotel, and that was that. She had him convinced she was the answer to all his prayers within a week. You didn't trust her from the start. She was nice enough to my face when he was around, but I could see something calculating in her eyes. And when he wasn't there, she'd say the cruelest things, that I was a burden, that she'd have a much better life if I weren't in the way, that my father would be happier without me." Olivia set down her spoon, her appetite apparently gone. "I think she married him for the farm. He's not wealthy, but he has good land and enough money saved. I think she saw an easy life and I was just an obstacle to it. So she decided to remove the obstacle. Yes." The word came out flat, emotionless, but Carter could see the tremor in her hands. He reached across and covered her hand with his, a gesture of comfort that felt natural despite them being virtual strangers. "She failed. You're alive and you're going to stay that way." Olivia looked up at him, those honey-colored eyes searching his face. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me. I've brought trouble to your door." "You didn't bring anything. You needed help and I was there to give it. That's not trouble, that's just being human." Her eyes filled with tears, and she blinked them back rapidly. "Thank you. I don't think I've said that yet. Thank you for saving my life." "You did the saving," Carter said. "You kept yourself alive long enough to find shelter. That took strength most people don't have." They talked through the long hours while the storm raged outside. Carter found himself telling her about his childhood in Kansas, his years on the trail, the dream of owning his own place that had driven him to save every penny. Olivia spoke of her mother, the happy years before the sickness came, her love of reading, and her secret desire to see more of the world than just Pueblo, Colorado. "I used to imagine traveling," she said on the third day, as she helped him prepare dinner, despite his protests that she should rest. "Taking a train to San Francisco or New York, seeing the ocean, walking down streets where nobody knew me. Is that silly?" "No." Carter was peeling potatoes, a task he'd done 10,000 times, but which felt different with her standing beside him, cutting carrots from his winter stores. "Everyone should see more than just the place they were born. The world's a big place." "Have you seen the ocean?" "Once. Took a herd down to the Gulf of Mexico years back. The size of it takes your breath away. Makes you realize how small you are, but in a good way. I'd like to see that someday." She said it wistfully, as if it were an impossible dream rather than something that could actually happen. By the time they sat down to eat, the wind had finally started to die down. The constant roar that had been their backdrop for days faded to intermittent gusts, and when Carter looked out the window, he could actually see more than 2 feet in front of it. "Storm's breaking," he said. Olivia's face, which had been relaxed and almost happy as they cooked together, tightened with tension. What happens now? It was the question they'd both been avoiding. Carter set down his fork and met her eyes squarely. That depends. What do you want to happen? I want to never see Martha again. I want my father to believe me about what she did. I want, she trailed off, shaking her head. I want things I can't have. Tell me what you'd do if you could do anything. Money and propriety and everything else be damned. What would you do? Olivia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. I'd leave. Go somewhere new. Start over where nobody knows me or my history. I'd find work, support myself, be free. All right, let's figure out how to make that happen. Carter, I can't. You know I can't. A woman alone with no money, no references. Even if I could get somewhere, I'd end up. She didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what she meant. The options for destitute women were grim. You're not alone, Carter said. The idea had been forming in his head for the past day, and now it crystallized into clarity. I could come with you. What? No, you have your land, your cattle. I can't ask you to give that up. You're not asking, I'm offering. He leaned forward, willing her to understand. I've been working this land for 2 years. It's a good place, but it's not the only place. Colorado's got opportunities everywhere, especially for someone who knows ranching. We could go somewhere neither of us is known. Denver, maybe, or up north toward Wyoming. Carter, you don't owe me that. You've already saved my life. You don't need to upend yours to help me more. Maybe I'm not just doing it for you. The words came out before he'd fully thought them through, but once said, he realized they were true. I've been alone on this land for 2 years. It's been fine, but fine isn't the same as good. The past 3 days, having someone to talk to share meals with, it's made me realize how much I've been missing that. Olivia stared at him, her expression unreadable. You're suggesting we travel together. People would assume we were married. Then we tell them we're married. The silence that fell was heavy with implication. Carter could hear his own heartbeat, could see the rapid rise and fall of Olivia's breathing. He'd essentially just proposed to a woman he'd known for 3 days. And the crazy thing was, it felt right. That's absurd, Olivia finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. We barely know each other. I know you're brave. I know you're kind, and you don't give up even when things seem impossible. I know you can cook better than I can, and you don't complain even when you've got every reason to. That's more than a lot of married couples know about each other when they say their vows. But marriage is. She struggled for words. It's supposed to be about love. It's supposed to be about a lot of things. Partnership, companionship, mutual support. We could have those things. The rest. He let the sentence hang, not willing to promise feelings he wasn't sure he could deliver, but hoping she understood that possibilities existed. Olivia stood abruptly and walked to the window, hugging herself as she stared out at the snow-covered landscape. Carter waited, giving her time to process. He knew he was asking for a huge leap of faith, knew that marrying a near stranger had to seem nearly as dangerous as staying with a stepmother who wanted her dead. If we did this, she said slowly, not turning around, it would have to be a real marriage. I won't be anyone's burden or charity case. I'd pull my weight, contribute however I could. I wouldn't expect anything less. And if we found we couldn't stand each other after a few months, if this turns out to be a terrible mistake? Carter stood and crossed to her, stopping just behind her without touching. Then we'd figure it out, but I don't think it would be a mistake. These past few days, even with everything that's happened, I've been happier than I've been in years. I think you might feel the same, even if you're afraid to admit it. She turned then, and he could see tears on her cheeks. I am afraid. Of so many things. Of Martha. Of being alone. Of making another mistake, like my father did with his hasty marriage. But I'm also afraid of going back to the life I had, of being trapped and powerless. Then don't go back. Come forward instead with me. You really mean this. You'd give up your land, your life here to help me start over. I'd sell the land, probably get a decent price for it, actually. The cabin's solid and the acreage is good. That money would give us a good start somewhere else. He paused, then added, and I'm not giving up my life. I'm choosing a different one. There's a difference. Olivia searched his face for a long moment, and Carter let her look, kept his expression open and honest. Finally, she took a deep breath and nodded. All right, yes, I'll marry you. The relief that washed through him was surprising in its intensity. You're sure? No, but I'm less unsure about this than about any other option I have. A small, tentative smile appeared on her face. Besides, you make good coffee. That's not nothing. Carter laughed, the sound surprising them both in the quiet cabin. High praise indeed. We'll make it work, Olivia. I promise you that. She held out her hand, and he took it, sealing their unlikely bargain with a handshake that felt more binding than any written contract. The sun rose clear and cold the next morning, revealing a transformed landscape. Snow blanketed everything in pristine white, broken only by the dark shapes of buildings and the tracks of wildlife. Carter woke early and lay still for a moment, adjusting to the new reality they'd created the night before. Olivia was still asleep in his bed, her auburn hair spread across his pillow. He'd continued sleeping by the fire, though the temptation to join her had been strong. They'd have to present themselves as a married couple soon enough, but until they actually spoke vows, he'd maintain what propriety he could. He dressed quietly and headed outside to assess the damage and start digging out. The snow had drifted to impressive heights in some places, and it took him over an hour to clear a path to the barn and check on the cattle. He'd lost one, an older cow that had probably been struggling even before the storm, but the rest seemed to have weathered it well. When he returned to the cabin, Olivia was awake and had made breakfast. The domesticity of it struck him, how natural it felt to come inside to warmth and food and her smile of greeting. How are the animals? She asked, handing him a plate of eggs and bacon. Good, all things considered. Lost one cow, but that's better than I feared. He sat at his small table, which now had 2 plates instead of 1, 2 cups instead of 1. Weather's clear. We should talk about next steps. Olivia nodded, her expression growing serious. I've been thinking. We need to make this look legitimate. If we just disappear, there will be questions. Martha might even accuse you of kidnapping me. What do you suggest? We should go into town. Tell people we've been courting in secret, that the storm trapped us together, and we decided to get married. It'll cause a scandal, but a smaller one than the truth. And we should do it quickly, before my father gets back from Denver. Carter considered this. People will know the timeline doesn't work. You and I have never been seen together before. We'll say we met at church or at the general store and kept it quiet because we knew my stepmother would disapprove. It doesn't have to be a perfect story, just plausible enough that people can accept it. She met his eyes. The important thing is that we're legally married before my father returns. That way, Martha can't claim I ran away or that anything improper happened. I'll be a married woman who made her own choice. Your father's going to be furious. Probably, but he'll get over it eventually. And he'll be alive, which is more than I can say if I go back to that house with Martha. Her voice hardened. I won't give her another chance to finish what she started. They spent the morning preparing. Carter had a clean suit he'd bought for church, but rarely wore, and Olivia washed and mended her dress as best she could. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. In the early afternoon, Carter hitched up his horse to the small sleigh he used for winter transport, and they set out for Pueblo. The 5-mile journey took over an hour, the horse struggling through deep snow. Olivia sat close beside him, whether for warmth or nerves he couldn't tell. As they drew closer to town, he felt her tension increase. We can still turn back, he said quietly. If you've changed your mind. I haven't. I'm just scared. Of what? Of everything. Of people's reactions. Of what comes after. Of disappointing you. She looked at him then, and he could see the vulnerability in her eyes. You're taking this huge gamble on me, and I don't want to let you down. Carter pulled the horse to a stop and turned to face her fully. Listen to me. The only way you could disappoint me is if you're unhappy. That's all I want from this, for both of us to be happier than we were before. Can you do that? Can you try to build a good life with me? Yes, she said softly. I can try. Then that's enough. He urged the horse forward again, and soon they were entering the outskirts of Pueblo. The town was busy despite the snow, people digging out and checking on neighbors, children throwing snowballs and building snow forts. A few people called out greetings to Carter, and he saw their curious looks at Olivia beside him. They went straight to the church, a simple wooden structure at the edge of town. Reverend Patterson was shoveling his front walk and looked up in surprise as they approached. Carter Sinclair didn't expect to see anyone out today. Roads must be terrible. His gaze moved to Olivia, curiosity plain on his weathered face. Reverend, this is Olivia Bennett. We'd like you to marry us. Today, if possible. The Reverend's eyebrows shot up. Marry you? Well, now that's sudden. Miss Bennett, aren't you Joseph Bennett's daughter? Yes, sir, Olivia said, her voice steady, despite the color rising in her cheeks. Does your father know about this? No, sir, he's in Denver on business, but I'm of age and free to make my own decisions. Reverend Patterson looked between them, clearly struggling with the impropriety of it all. This is highly irregular. There should be a courtship period, bans posted. Your family's involved. With respect, Reverend, we know our own minds, Carter said. We'd like to be married today. If you're not willing, we'll find a justice of the peace who is. The older man sighed. You'll need witnesses, and I'll need to be sure Miss Bennett is entering into this of her own free will. I am, Olivia said firmly. I swear it. The Reverend studied her for a long moment, and Carter wondered what he saw. A young woman pale from recent ordeal, dressed in a worn dress, standing beside a man she clearly hadn't known long. But whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. All right, give me an hour to make arrangements. Come to the church at 3 o'clock. They thanked him and headed into town proper. Word spread with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. By the time they reached the general store to purchase a ring, people were already whispering. Carter ignored the stares and focused on finding something appropriate. The storekeeper, a thin man named Harold Greaves, couldn't contain his curiosity. Getting married, are you? That's quite the surprise, Carter. Didn't know you were courting. We kept it quiet, Carter said, examining the small selection of rings. Olivia's stepmother didn't approve, so we saw each other when we could. That would be Martha Bennett then. Heard she was a difficult woman. Greaves leaned forward conspiratorially. Heard she and the girl didn't get along. We got along fine, Olivia interjected smoothly. We just had different ideas about my future. She wanted me to marry a businessman from town. I preferred a rancher. It was a good lie, simple and believable. Carter selected a plain gold band that looked like it might fit and paid for it, along with some supplies they'd need for the journey ahead. As they left the store, they nearly collided with a woman in an expensive dress and fur-trimmed coat. She stopped short, her eyes widening as she took in Olivia. Olivia Bennett, what are you doing in town? I thought you'd be home helping your stepmother with the storm cleanup. The woman's gaze slid to Carter, sharpening with interest. And who is this? Mrs. Whitmore, Olivia said, and Carter heard the strain in her voice. This is Carter Sinclair. He's my intended. We're getting married this afternoon. Mrs. Whitmore's mouth fell open in a most unladylike fashion. Married? But your father's in Denver. Does he know about this? He will soon enough. We didn't want to wait. Olivia took Carter's arm, holding tight. It was lovely to see you, Mrs. Whitmore, but we need to go. Wedding preparations, you understand. They walked away quickly, leaving the woman sputtering behind them. Olivia was trembling, and Carter covered her hand with his. You all right? That's Martha's best friend. She'll send word out to the farm as soon as she can find a messenger boy. Olivia's voice was tight with tension. Martha will know within the hour. Good. Let her know. By the time she can do anything about it, you'll be my wife, and there's not a damn thing she can do to change that. They killed time walking around town, stopping for a meal at the hotel restaurant, where the owner, a kind older woman named Mrs. Chen, expressed delight at their news and insisted on giving them the meal free as a wedding present. By the time 3 o'clock arrived, word had spread throughout Pueblo, and the church was surprisingly full. Carter wasn't sure if people had come out of genuine happiness or mere curiosity, but he didn't care. Reverend Patterson stood at the front with two of the town's more respected citizens as witnesses, and that was all that mattered. The ceremony was simple and brief. Carter spoke his vows clearly, sliding the ring onto Olivia's finger with steady hands. Olivia's voice wavered slightly on her vows, but she met his eyes as she spoke, and he saw determination there alongside the fear. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Patterson said. You may kiss your bride. Carter hesitated, aware this would be their first kiss, aware they had an audience. Then Olivia rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, a brief, chaste kiss that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through his chest. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, and she was almost smiling. They signed the marriage certificate, their witnesses adding their names, and just like that, it was done. Carter Sinclair and Olivia Bennett were now Carter and Olivia Sinclair, bound together by law and circumstance and choice. As they left the church, people crowded around to offer congratulations and barely concealed curiosity. Carter fielded questions as best he could, sticking to their story about a secret courtship. Olivia remained close to his side, accepting well wishes with gracious smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. They were nearly to the sleigh when a commotion at the edge of the crowd made everyone turn. A horse and rider had arrived at breakneck speed, and Carter's stomach sank as he recognized the rigid figure of Martha Bennett. She dismounted in a fury, her face twisted with rage as she pushed through the crowd. Olivia, what have you done? I've gotten married, Olivia said, her voice remarkably calm. As is my right. Your father will be furious. How dare you do this without his permission? Martha's eyes were wild, and Carter saw the calculation behind the anger. She'd lost her chance to get rid of Olivia permanently, and she knew it. I'm 19 years old. I don't need his permission. Olivia stood straighter, and Carter felt pride surge through him at her strength. I'm sorry if this upsets you, Martha, but my life is my own to live. You ungrateful little. Martha caught herself, aware of the watching crowd. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Running off with some cowboy? That cowboy is my husband, Olivia said firmly, and I'll thank you to speak of him with respect. Martha's gaze swung to Carter, and he met it steadily. He saw hatred there, and fear, and the desperate anger of someone whose plans had fallen apart. You'll regret this, she hissed, both of you. Is that a threat, Mrs. Bennett? Reverend Patterson stepped forward, his expression stern, because if it is, I'm sure the sheriff would be interested to hear it. Martha's mouth snapped shut. She looked around at the gathered townspeople, seeming to realize that her mask had slipped, that they were seeing something of her true nature. With visible effort, she composed herself. Of course not, Reverend. I'm simply concerned for my stepdaughter's welfare. This marriage is so sudden, so unexpected. One wonders about the circumstances that led to it. It was a clear attempt to cast aspersions on Olivia's virtue, to suggest impropriety that would tarnish her reputation even in marriage. But before Carter could respond, Mrs. Chen from the hotel spoke up. Young love is always sudden, Martha. And from what I hear, these two have been sweet on each other for months. Just because they kept it quiet doesn't mean it's not real. The older woman's voice was kind but firm, and several others murmured agreement. Martha's expression darkened further, but she had no recourse. She'd been outmaneuvered, and she knew it. Your father will hear about this the moment he returns, she said to Olivia. Don't think you can hide from the consequences. I'm not hiding from anything, Olivia replied. But I'm also not living under your roof anymore. I'll write to father and explain everything. You'll regret this, Martha repeated, then turned and remounted her horse with quick, angry movements. She galloped away without another word, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. Reverend Patterson cleared his throat. Well now, that was unfortunate, but a marriage is a marriage, and I wish you both every happiness. He nodded to Carter. Take care of your wife, young man. I will, sir. You have my word. The crowd dispersed slowly, people heading home in the failing light. Carter helped Olivia into the sleigh and urged the horse forward, eager to be away from town and prying eyes. They were a mile out when Olivia finally spoke. She's not going to let this go. I know, but she can't undo it. You're legally my wife now. Your father can be angry. Your stepmother can make threats, but none of it changes the fact that you're safe from her. Am I, though? She wanted me dead, Carter. Finding out I'm alive and married might only make her more desperate. Carter had been thinking the same thing, which is why we're leaving. Tonight, if we can manage it. We'll go back to my place, pack what we need, and head out at first light. We'll be in Denver before your father even gets back, and from there we can go anywhere we want. Where will we go? Where do you want to go? Olivia was quiet for a moment, then said, somewhere with mountains and rivers, somewhere I can see stars without worrying what tomorrow will bring. I know just the place, Montana, up near the Yellowstone. It's beautiful country, still wild but opening up for settlement. A man with ranching experience can do well there. And a woman, can she do well there too? Carter looked at her, this woman who'd become his wife in the space of a few strange days. I think you can do well anywhere, Olivia. You've got the strength for it. She smiled then, a real smile that lit up her face. I hope you're right. They reached the cabin as full dark descended. Inside, Carter built up the fire, while Olivia started gathering supplies. They worked together efficiently, sorting through his possessions to determine what was essential and what could be left behind or sold. We'll need to tell your father where we've gone, Carter said as he packed his tools. It's not fair to leave him wondering. I'll write him a letter, explain everything about Martha, about us, about why I had to leave. Olivia's voice was sad. He may not understand, but at least he'll know I'm safe. You think he'll come after us? I don't know. I hope not. I hope he'll accept my choice and let me live my life. She folded one of his shirts carefully, adding it to the pack. But if he does come, we'll deal with it together. Right? Right. They worked late into the night until exhaustion finally drove them both towards sleep. The sleeping arrangements were awkward now, the boundaries between them shifted by vows spoken and a ring worn. Carter started to make his usual bedroll by the fire, but Olivia stopped him. We're married now, she said softly. You don't have to sleep on the floor. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. You won't, I trust you. She climbed into the bed, leaving room for him. Besides, we should probably get used to sharing. Carter hesitated only a moment more, then joined her, lying carefully on his side, facing away. But Olivia shifted closer, and he felt her hand rest lightly on his arm. Thank you, she whispered in the darkness, for everything. You don't have to keep thanking me. I know, but I want to. Her breath was warm against his shoulder. I know this isn't a conventional marriage. I know we're still learning who each other is. But I want you to know that I'm grateful you gave me this chance. Carter rolled over to face her, their faces inches apart in the dim light from the dying fire. I'm grateful too. I didn't realize how lonely I'd been until you showed up and changed everything. They lay there looking at each other, and Carter felt something shift between them, a deepening of the connection they'd been building. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the foundation on which love could be built. Trust, respect, a growing affection that felt warm and right. Good night, Olivia, he said quietly. Good night, Carter. They woke before dawn and finished their preparations quickly. Carter wrote a note explaining he was selling the property and left it with the deed papers to be delivered to the land office. Everything that wouldn't fit in their packs or the small wagon he'd loaded was left for whoever bought the place. By the time the sun cleared the eastern horizon, they were on the road to Denver, the cabin and land Carter had worked so hard for receding behind them. He felt a pang of regret, but when he looked at Olivia sitting beside him, wrapped in blankets against the cold, he knew he'd made the right choice. The journey to Denver took 3 days of hard traveling. They stayed in small roadside inns, presenting themselves as newlyweds heading north to start a ranch. Olivia played her part well, and Carter found himself enjoying the pretense that was slowly becoming reality. She made him laugh with dry observations about their fellow travelers. She impressed innkeepers with her courtesy and grace. And each night they shared a bed with increasing comfort, the initial awkwardness fading into something more natural. On the second night, as they lay in yet another unfamiliar bed, Olivia asked, "Do you have family in Montana? Anyone who'll be surprised when we show up?" "No family anywhere. My parents are dead and I was an only child." "You?" "Just my father, and any family he has is back east. We've got no one here except each other." It should have been a sad realization, but somehow it wasn't. They were building something new, just the two of them, with no obligations to anyone else's expectations. "That's all right," Carter said. "We'll make our own family. Someday, if you want." "Children?" Olivia's voice held a mixture of longing and fear. "I'd like that. Someday, when we're more settled." "No rush. We've got time to figure things out." They reached Denver on the third day, a bustling city of nearly 40,000 people. It was overwhelming after days on the empty roads, the noise and crowds making Olivia press close to Carter's side. They found a modest hotel and took a room, then set about making arrangements for the next leg of their journey. Denver was full of opportunities and dangers in equal measure. Carter sold his wagon and horses, getting a good price that would fund their travels north. He bought train tickets to Billings, Montana, and spent their remaining time in the city outfitting them with supplies they'd need for the harsh Montana winters. On their second evening in Denver, as they walked back to the hotel after dinner, a man stepped into their path. He was older, perhaps 50, with silver streaking his dark hair and cold blue eyes that fixed on Olivia with disturbing intensity. "Miss Bennett, I thought that was you." Olivia went rigid beside Carter. "Mr. Thornton, I'm surprised to see you here." "I'm surprised to see you as well, especially in such circumstances." His gaze moved to Carter, assessing and dismissive. "Your father told me you were staying home with your stepmother while he conducted business here. He made no mention of a young man." "My plans changed. Mr. Thornton, this is my husband, Carter Sinclair." "Carter, this is Edgar Thornton. He does business with my father." "Husband." The emphasis Olivia placed on the word was clear, as was the warning in her eyes. Carter stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of her. "Mr. Thornton, pleasure to meet you." Carter didn't extend his hand, and neither did the other man. "Husband. How unexpected." Thornton's voice dripped with skepticism. "Your father will be most surprised to hear this news. In fact, I believe I'll call on him this evening and inform him myself." "You do that," Carter said evenly. "We're married legal and proper, with witnesses and a reverend. Nothing he can say will change that. Perhaps. But a father has a right to know when his daughter makes such a significant decision, particularly when that daughter is barely more than a child." His eyes went back to Olivia, and Carter felt his hands curl into fists at the possessive hunger he saw there. "Your father and I had an understanding, Miss Bennett. Or should I say Mrs. Sinclair? We were to discuss a potential match between us when he returned from his business here." Olivia's face had gone pale. I was never consulted about any such match. Your consent was not required. You're a daughter, not a business partner. Thornton's voice hardened. But it seems that arrangement is now void. How convenient for you. We're leaving, Carter said, taking Olivia's arm. Excuse us. Running away won't change anything, Thornton called after them. Your father will be informed, and I suspect he'll have questions about the nature of this sudden marriage and where his daughter can be found. They didn't look back. Carter guided Olivia quickly through the crowded streets, not slowing until they reached their hotel. Once in their room with the door locked, Olivia collapsed into a chair, shaking. He was going to marry me to that man, she said, her voice hollow with shock. My father was going to give me to Edgar Thornton. Carter knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. But he didn't. You're married to me, and Thornton can't change that, no matter what arrangements he thought he had. You don't understand. Thornton is wealthy, powerful. If he's angry about this, he could make trouble for us. And if my father agreed to the match, he'll be furious that I've ruined it. Her eyes were wide with fear. We need to leave Denver tonight. The train doesn't leave until tomorrow afternoon. Then we'll go by horseback, by stagecoach, anything. Please, Carter. I saw the way Thornton looked at me. He's not the type to accept disappointment. Carter could see she was genuinely terrified, and his own instincts were screaming that she was right. Men like Thornton, used to getting what they wanted, could be dangerous when thwarted. All right, we'll leave tonight. I'll see if there's a stage heading north or if we can buy horses. Pack everything. We may have to move fast. He left her in the room and headed downstairs to make arrangements. The hotel clerk informed him that a freight wagon was heading towards Cheyenne at midnight, and the driver might be willing to take passengers for the right price. It wasn't ideal, but it would get them moving. Carter paid double the usual rate, and the driver agreed to pick them up at the back of the hotel at 11. Carter returned to the room to find Olivia had already packed everything they owned into 2 bags, her movements quick and efficient. We're leaving at 11, he told her. Freight wagon to Cheyenne, then we'll catch a train from there to Montana. Thank you. She came to him then, wrapping her arms around his waist and holding tight. I'm sorry, I keep bringing trouble to you. You didn't bring anything. These circumstances found you. You're just trying to survive them. He held her close, feeling the trembling in her body. We're going to be all right, Olivia. I promise you that. They waited in tense silence for the hours to pass. At 10:30, Carter gathered their bags and led Olivia down the back stairs. The alley behind the hotel was dark and empty, and they huddled in the shadows, waiting for their ride. The freight wagon arrived right on time, and they climbed aboard quickly. The driver, a grizzled man who asked no questions, urged his team forward, and they rattled out of Denver under cover of darkness. Olivia leaned against Carter as they bounced along the rough road, exhaustion and stress finally catching up with her. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, tucking her close against his side. Try to sleep, he murmured. We've got a long way to go. Carter? Her voice was drowsy. I'm glad it's you. That I married you, I mean. Whatever happens, I'm glad. Something warm expanded in his chest. I'm glad too. She fell asleep against him, and Carter kept watch through the long night, one hand on his rifle, the other holding his wife close. They were running, leaving everything behind, but somehow he didn't feel like he was losing anything. Instead, he felt like he was finally finding what he'd been searching for all along. The journey to Montana took another week, a combination of freight wagons, trains, and finally a hired horse for the last leg from Billings to the small town of Red Lodge. By the time they arrived, winter had fully set in, the mountains surrounding the valley white with snow and breathtakingly beautiful. Red Lodge was a mining town in transition, starting to attract ranchers looking for good grazing land. Carter had heard about it from other cowboys, had always thought it might be a good place to settle if he ever left Colorado. Now, seeing it with Olivia beside him, he knew he'd made the right call. They took a room at the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Sullivan, a practical woman in her 50s who took one look at their weary faces and offered them dinner along with the room. Over stew and fresh bread, Carter explained they were looking to start a ranch in the area. Plenty of land available, Mrs. Sullivan said, refilling their coffee cups. The valley's opening up, and we can use more good people. You two look like you know hard work when you see it. We do, madam, Carter said. I've been ranching since I was a boy. I'm looking for a place where we can build something lasting. Well, you should talk to Samuel Davis at the land office. He knows every parcel available in the territory. She turned her attention to Olivia. And you, dear? You're not from around here, I can tell. No, madam. Colorado originally. But we're looking to make Montana our home. Olivia managed a tired smile. I'm hoping to find it suits me. It's beautiful country, but it's hard too. Winters can be brutal, and we're still pretty isolated. But if you've got grit, you'll do fine. Over the next few days, Carter and Olivia settled into a routine. They met with Samuel Davis and looked at several properties. Carter was particular, looking for good water and shelter, flat land for a house and barn, and enough acreage to support a growing herd. They found it on their fourth day of searching. 180 acres nestled against the base of the mountains, with a creek running through it and a stand of cottonwoods perfect for building. The previous owner had started a cabin, but had to leave when his wife fell ill. The structure was solid but unfinished, which suited Carter fine. He could complete it himself, make it exactly what they needed. The price took most of their money, but Carter didn't hesitate. This was it. Their fresh start. Their future. They moved in the next week, though moved in was generous for taking up residence in a half-finished cabin with gaps in the walls and no proper door. But Olivia attacked the problem with determination, helping Carter haul lumber and hammer boards while they both shivered in the cold. I've never built anything before, she said one afternoon, as they worked together to hang a proper door. My father always hired help for this kind of work. You're doing fine, better than fine. You learn quick. She smiled at the praise, and Carter found himself noticing how much more she smiled now than she had those first days in Colorado. The fear that had haunted her eyes was fading, replaced by something that looked like hope. They worked through December, weatherproofing the cabin and making it livable. Carter went into town periodically to buy supplies and look for cattle to start his herd. Olivia stayed at the cabin, cleaning and organizing, making curtains from fabric she'd bought, creating a home from rough materials and determination. On Christmas Eve, as they sat by the fire in their now cozy cabin, Olivia handed Carter a package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? Open it! Inside was a shirt she'd made from fabric she must have bought on one of the rare occasions she'd come to town with him. The stitching was careful and even, and the fit was perfect. Olivia, this is... He didn't have words. Thank you. I wanted to give you something. You've given me so much. Carter set the shirt aside carefully and pulled out the package he'd hidden under his bunk. Then I guess it's good that I got you something too. Her eyes lit up as she unwrapped the books. 3 of them, novels she'd mentioned wanting to read during one of their long evening conversations. She clutched them to her chest like they were made of gold. How did you afford these? We need every penny for the ranch. Some things are more important than pennies. I want you to be happy here, Olivia. I want this to feel like home. She set the books down carefully, then moved to sit beside him. They'd been growing closer over the weeks, the touches more frequent and more lingering, but they still hadn't crossed certain lines. Now, though, Olivia turned to face him fully, her honey-colored eyes serious. It does feel like home. And that's because of you, not the cabin or the land or anything else. She took a breath, as if gathering courage. These past weeks, I've been happier than I've been in years, maybe ever. You're kind and patient, and you make me laugh. You make me feel safe. And I want you to know that I don't regret our marriage, not for a single moment. Carter's heart was pounding. I don't regret it either. I know we started this out of necessity, but it's become more than that, at least for me. For me too. She moved closer, her face inches from his. Is it too soon to say I'm falling in love with you? The words hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Olivia, you don't have to say it back. I just wanted you to know. I wanted to be honest about how I feel. Carter cupped her face in his hands, looking into those beautiful eyes. I'm falling in love with you too. Have been for weeks. I think. Maybe since that first morning when you opened your eyes and I saw the strength in you. She smiled, radiant and joyful, and then she kissed him. Not the brief, chaste kiss from their wedding, but something deeper, fuller. Carter pulled her closer, pouring weeks of growing affection and desire into the kiss, and she responded with equal passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Olivia rested her forehead against his. I want this to be a real marriage. In every way. Are you sure we can wait? There's no rush. I'm sure. I want to be your wife completely. I want to share your bed and your life and everything that comes with it. Carter stood and held out his hand. She took it without hesitation, and he led her to the bed they'd been sharing, but not really sharing for weeks. This time, when they lay down together, there were no barriers between them, no hesitation or fear, just two people choosing each other fully, binding themselves together in a way that went beyond any words spoken in a church. The winter deepened, and so did their love. The cabin was finished, warm and snug against the Montana cold. Carter bought 20 head of cattle from a rancher selling out, a small start, but a start nonetheless. Olivia proved herself capable of ranch work, helping with feeding and tending the animals without complaint. In February, a letter arrived from Colorado. Olivia's hands shook as she opened it, and Carter read over her shoulder. It was from her father, and the words were not kind. He raged about her deception, about the humiliation she'd caused him with Edgar Thornton, about her ungrateful abandonment. But near the end, the anger faded into something more sorrowful. He wrote that he hoped she was happy, that her hasty marriage was at least to a good man, and that perhaps someday they could reconcile. There was no mention of Martha except to say that his wife was most distressed by Olivia's actions. No mention of the attempted murder or the abuse Olivia had endured. Either Martha had successfully concealed it, or Joseph Bennett was choosing to believe his wife over his daughter. Olivia folded the letter carefully, her expression sad but resigned. I suppose that's that then. He's chosen her side. I'm sorry. I am too. But I have you now. I have this life. It's enough. In March, Olivia realized she was pregnant. The discovery came with a mix of joy and fear, and she held Carter's hand tightly as she told him the news. Already? He said, his face cycling through several expressions before landing on something like wonder. We're having a baby? Are you happy? I know we said we'd wait until we were more settled. Happy? Olivia, He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I'm terrified and thrilled, and I can't believe we're going to be parents. Yes, I'm happy. The pregnancy progressed without complication, and Olivia bloomed despite the morning sickness and fatigue. Carter found himself watching her constantly, amazed by the changes in her body, protective in a way that sometimes bordered on excessive. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she'd tease, when he insisted on doing tasks she was perfectly capable of handling. I know, I just want to make sure you and the baby are safe. We're safe. We're happy. Everything's going to be fine. And it was. Through the spring and summer, their little ranch grew. The cattle thrived on the rich mountain grass. Carter built an addition to the cabin for the baby's room. Olivia planted a garden and learned to preserve food for the coming winter. They made friends with their neighbors, becoming part of the Red Lodge community. In October, as the aspens turned gold and red on the mountainsides, Olivia went into labor. Mrs. Sullivan and the local midwife attended her, while Carter paced outside like a caged animal, listening to every sound from within the cabin. When his son's first cry split the air, Carter's knees nearly gave out from relief. The midwife emerged an hour later, smiling. "You've got a healthy boy, Mr. Sinclair, and your wife is doing well. You can go in now." Carter entered the cabin to find Olivia propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in the blanket she'd sewn. She looked up as he approached, and the love in her eyes took his breath away. "Meet your son," she said softly. Carter looked down at the red-faced, perfect baby in her arms and felt something shift in his chest, a love so fierce and immediate it almost hurt. "He's beautiful. You're beautiful. I don't know what I did to deserve this. You gave me a chance when I had none. You gave me a home and a future. You loved me when I'd forgotten what being loved felt like." Olivia's voice was thick with emotion. "I'm the one who doesn't know what I did to deserve you." "We deserve each other," Carter said, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "And we deserve this life we're building. What should we name him?" They discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never settled on anything. Now, looking at their son, Olivia said, "James, after my grandfather. He was a good man, and I'd like our son to carry his name." "James Sinclair, I like it." Carter carefully touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling when small fingers wrapped around his. "Welcome to the world, James. We're going to do our best by you." The first year of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless work and more happiness than Carter had known possible. The ranch continued to grow. They bought more cattle, improved the barn, and made plans to expand further in the coming years. Olivia proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving with James, somehow managing to keep the household running while caring for an infant. Carter tried to help as much as he could, and he found he loved the middle-of-the-night feedings, the quiet moments holding his son while Olivia rested. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with James sleeping between them, Olivia said, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" "What do you mean?" "If Martha hadn't locked me out that night, if I'd died in the snow, if you hadn't found me." She looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. "Our whole life hangs on those moments." Carter considered this. "I think about it sometimes, but I also think that somehow we would have found each other anyway. Maybe not the same way, but eventually. You think we were meant to be? I think that some people fit together in a way that makes sense. We fit, Olivia. We've built something good here, something lasting. And it started because we both chose to keep fighting even when things were impossible." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. "I love you, Carter Sinclair. I love you too, more than I ever thought I could love anyone." They sat in peaceful silence as the sky turned purple and orange, and Carter felt a contentment he'd never experienced before. This was what he'd been searching for during all those years on the trail, all those months alone on his Colorado ranch. Not just land or success, but connection, family, love. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, and 3 years after that, another son. The ranch prospered, and Carter bought more land, expanding their holdings until they had one of the more successful operations in the Red Lodge Valley. Olivia became known for her kindness and strength, helping neighbors in need and organizing community events. She never heard from her father again, though she wrote him letters on occasion, hoping someday he might respond. Martha was apparently still at the Colorado farm, still playing the devoted wife, and Joseph Bennett seemed content to ignore the daughter who'd defied him. It hurt Olivia, that rejection, but she had her own family now. Carter and the children were her priority, and she poured all the love she might have given her father into them instead. On their 10th anniversary, Carter surprised her with a trip. He'd saved money carefully, arranged for Mrs. Sullivan to watch the children, and took his wife on the train to San Francisco. Olivia's face when she first saw the Pacific Ocean was something Carter would remember for the rest of his life. She stood on the beach, tears streaming down her face, and laughed with pure joy. "It's so big," she said, turning to him with shining eyes. "You brought me to see the ocean." I promised myself I would. You said you wanted to see it, and you deserve to see everything you've ever dreamed of. They spent a week in San Francisco, staying in a real hotel, eating in restaurants, walking the hilly streets hand in hand like the newlyweds they'd once been. It was a gift to themselves, a reminder that they were more than just ranchers and parents. They were still Carter and Olivia, two people who'd chosen each other in impossible circumstances and had built a life beyond anything either had imagined. On their last night in the city, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out at the lights, Olivia said, "I never thanked you properly. For the trip, you've thanked me 100 times. Not for the trip, for saving my life, for giving me this chance at happiness. I know I've said it before, but I want to say it again. Everything good in my life started that morning when you found me on your porch." Carter turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands the way he had that Christmas Eve so many years ago. "You saved yourself, Olivia. You were the one who refused to give up, who kept walking through that storm. I just gave you a place to rest." "We saved each other," she said softly. "I think that's the truth of it. I think you're right." They returned to Montana, to their ranch and their children, and the life they'd built together. The years continued to pass, marked by the growth of their family and the success of their business. James grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Their daughter Elizabeth inherited her mother's kindness and her father's determination, and their youngest, Thomas, was a wild spirit who kept them all on their toes. Carter and Olivia aged together, their love deepening with each passing year. The initial passion matured into something richer, a partnership based on deep respect and affection. They knew each other's moods and thoughts, could communicate with a look across a crowded room, and still found ways to surprise and delight each other. When Martha Bennett died in 1902, Olivia felt nothing but relief. Her father sent a brief telegram with the news, the first communication she'd received from him in nearly 20 years. She wrote back offering condolences and an invitation to visit Montana, to meet his grandchildren, to reconcile after so many wasted years. Joseph Bennett arrived 3 months later, an old man bent by time and regret. He met his grandchildren with tears in his eyes and begged Olivia's forgiveness for not believing her, for choosing Martha over his own daughter. "She was sick," he said, his voice breaking. "In her mind, I mean. I didn't see it at first, but in those last years, it became impossible to ignore. She'd have these rages, say terrible things. The doctor said it was a disease of the brain, but by then you were gone, and I was too proud and too ashamed to reach out." Olivia forgave him because holding on to anger would have poisoned the beautiful life she'd built. But she also didn't forget. Her father stayed for a month, getting to know his grandchildren, seeing the ranch and the success his daughter had made of herself. When he left, he pressed money into Olivia's hands, an inheritance he insisted she take. "You don't need my money," Olivia protested. "No, but I want you to have it anyway. It's the only thing I can give you now, the only way I can make up even a fraction of what I cost you." His eyes were earnest, pleading. "Please, let me do this one thing right." She took the money and used it to build a new barn and buy more breeding stock. It felt right, turning her father's guilt into something productive, something that would benefit her children and grandchildren. Joseph Bennett returned to Colorado and died peacefully in his sleep 2 years later. Olivia mourned, but not as deeply as she might have if they'd had more time together. He was a stranger who shared her blood, not the father of her childhood who'd loved and protected her. That man had died with her mother, and no late reconciliation could bring him back. But life moved forward, as it always did. James married a local girl and started building his own herd on land Carter had given him. Elizabeth fell in love with a school teacher and moved to town but visited often. Thomas, the wild one, surprised everyone by studying law and opening a practice in Billings, though he too returned regularly to the ranch that would always be home. Carter and Olivia became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They slowed down as age caught up with them, handing over more of the ranch work to James and his sons, but they never stopped being active. They sat on the porch most evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains that had become as much a part of them as their own heartbeats. "Remember that first winter?" Olivia said one evening, her hair now white, her face lined, but still beautiful to Carter's eyes. "When we barely knew each other and were living in that half-finished cabin, I remember thinking I'd lost my mind, marrying a stranger and giving up everything I'd built." Carter took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Best decision I ever made. Even with all the hard times, the lean years, the sickness, the worry, especially with all that, the hard times showed me what we were made of, showed me that choosing you was the smartest thing I'd ever done." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I." Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, the gesture as familiar as breathing. "I was so scared that night, Carter. When Martha locked me out, when I was walking through that storm, I was certain I was going to die, and I was so angry about it that my life would end because of one woman's cruelty. But it didn't end. It began. Yes." She smiled, that radiant smile that had captured his heart so many years ago. "It began with you finding me frozen on your porch, and it's been a beautiful adventure ever since." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story and now watched over its continuation. Around them, the ranch they'd built together hummed with life and activity, the legacy they'd leave behind for generations to come. Carter Sinclair was 73 when his heart finally gave out, peacefully in his sleep with Olivia beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, tears streaming down her face, grateful for 50 years of love and partnership and devotion. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all carried pieces of the story she and Carter had written together. She never remarried, never even considered it. Carter had been her great love, her rescuer and partner and best friend. No one could replace him. On a cold December morning, almost exactly 55 years after Carter had found her on his porch, Olivia Bennett Sinclair died in her sleep, a smile on her face as if she'd seen something wonderful. Her family gathered to mourn and celebrate, sharing stories of the woman who'd survived the impossible and built a legacy of love and strength. They buried her next to Carter on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the shadow of the mountains they'd both loved. The headstone was simple, just their names and dates, but if you looked closely, you could see the inscription underneath: "Two souls who found each other in a storm and built a lifetime of sunshine." The ranch continued, passing to James's children and eventually their children, each generation adding to what Carter and Olivia had started. The story of how the family began became legend, passed down with pride and wonder. The girl who'd nearly died in a blizzard, the cowboy who'd saved her, the love that grew from impossible circumstances and lasted through 50 years of joy and struggle and devotion. And on cold winter mornings, when the snow fell heavy and the wind howled down from the mountains, the family would gather by the fire and remember. They'd remember that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, that courage can be found in the darkest moments, and that love, real love, is worth fighting for, no matter the odds. The Bennett Sinclair Ranch still stands today, a testament to what two people can build when they refuse to give up, when they choose each other again and again, when they turn tragedy into triumph and fear into hope. The original cabin is long gone, replaced by a larger house, but the creek still runs clear and cold. The mountains still stand sentinel over the valley, and the land remembers. It remembers the girl who walked through a blizzard and survived, the man who found her and chose to save her, the love that blossomed in the aftermath of cruelty, and the life they built together, one day at a time, until impossible became forever, and strangers became soulmates. Their story didn't end with death. It lives on in every generation that works the land they claimed, in every marriage that chooses partnership over perfection, in every person who looks at impossible odds and decides to fight anyway. Carter and Olivia's legacy isn't just the ranch or the family name. It's the reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are really doorways to the best ones, that helping a stranger can change everything, and that love, when given the chance to grow, can transform two broken pieces into something whole and beautiful and lasting. The end.